So what is Power and the Passion? What is this research that we've done? We have looked at a representative sample of over 2,000 Australians and the environmental and social issues that they care about. We've then also looked at where power sits and where power lies across these different issues. So without much further ado, let's begin.
What are the issues that Australians are most passionate about? And how do we, but also how do brands have the power to create the change? You'll have a look on your chair, and we've put a little booklet there for you to take away. It's actually one of two reports that we've brought out. The one is more about the power more broadly across society, which is called the Power to the People edition. And this is the brands edition, which is how brands can do it. So there's actually two versions. You can get the other one online, which we'll show you a little bit later. Who did we ask? We asked 500 of people across the different generations. You can see here, obviously, what the generation aging is / date of birth is. The one thing I will point out to you that Generation Z actually goes down to about the age of 12, but we only asked people 17 and up for obvious reasons, because you just can't, it's a different story if you start asking children. But so that's who we asked, 500 people across different generations, because we wanted to see how opinions change based on which generation you come from. We've all grown up in kind of different generations, and we've all kind of been given different information. There's been different concerns throughout those different times. In the simplest of terms, how you get answers back in research depends what you ask, obviously. So the first thing that you always ask, thanks to the genius of Nick Bez from Mobium Group, is the first thing you ask is just the big, broad, open question. Of all the social and environmental issues in Australia, which one concerns you the most? You were all asked a very similar question, actually, out the front, and we'll have a look at how you compare. But the simple version is global warming is actually the number one set of words that people came up with, very closely followed by COVID-19, or variations on that word. So if someone said climate change, we bundled it with global warming, obviously. But global warming was the number one set of words within that, the set of that context, and COVID-19 within that one. I think that's pretty seminal because obviously you can look at research over time, but very little has come out since COVID. So has COVID suddenly made us not worry about long-term issues? Absolutely not. We're still very much concerned about this. And you can start to see the word cloud around it. I think, to me, the number one tell of the word cloud is how much everything else drops out so quickly. Obviously, environment comes up pretty big, but the size of those is quite significantly ahead of everything else. When you instead give people a list of 20 questions, so first of all, we ask you broadly. Then we say, okay, here's 20 social and environmental issues. Now choose the ones that you're concerned about. Tell us what you're most concerned about. People say this. They say, number one, our oceans. So that's oceans, ocean pollution, fishing out the seas, all the sort of oceans-related issues. There's climate change comes in number two, and plastic waste comes in number three. And we did a little survey of course, everyone in the room before you came in, and funny enough, guess which two you all came up with? You are a representative sample of the population. We needn't have had 2,000 people. We could have got the 30-odd people in the room, because you all said oceans and climate change. Very interesting, hey? As your main two things. When you look at it, though, also, I'd point you to the numbers, where you go 36%. This is when we ask, we say, are you concerned, a bit concerned, very concerned, extremely concerned. We give you levels of concern. So this is the most concerned. And you'll notice, so extremely concerned, 36, 35, 33. There's not much between them, yeah? People have kind of got a pretty big interest in all of those things, which starts to play out of here, where you look at all the 20 issues we asked the question of. And you can see, as we say, our oceans, climate change, plastic waste, then toxic chemicals, loss of forests and habitat, air pollution. Then we go into domestic violence, mental health, children's health, and you can see down the line. We thought that two of the things that are very interesting here are, number one, the 6 issues Australians are most concerned about are all environmental. The next 6 are all about people. So then we go to the broader concern set. So that's only people who are at the top level of concern. What are they most concerned about? If we then just look at concern overall, so I'm anywhere from concerned to extremely concerned. And the order changes a little. Plastic waste comes number 1. Toxic chemicals suddenly comes up to number 2. Our ocean sits in there at number 3, loss of forest and habitat. And you start to see a pretty similar bunch of things here. Domestic violence works its way out, but very, very interesting. Climate change drops all the way down from a number 2 to number 12 issue. So it's the one issue that really changes order when you look at this stuff. I do want to point this out. The level of concern across those top issues, if you take the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 issues, they're all above 80%. And that's 81 and that's 83. There's almost nothing between them, which says that as a nation, we're pretty darn concerned about stuff. And it never drops below 57%. So that's a pretty high level of concern about where the future's going among people overall. When you look across generations, you see that there's we're looking at most concerned again, extremely concerned. You'll see there's a reasonable amount of consistency as to what people are concerned about. The two things that I'd call out for you, it tends to be climate change, oceans, and plastic waste sort of change order. The two things I would call out in a big way are, number one, mental health comes right up there for Gen Z as a total outlier across the generations. And number two, climate change completely drops out for boomers. And it drops right out of the top three, in fact, out of the top 5 issues. So when you start to say, well, who are these people who are averaging out the most concern on climate change, you start to get a little bit of a tell there potentially. Another thing worth looking at is when you look at overall level of concern of different issues by generation, you'll find that on average of all our 20 issues, Gen Z hold the highest overall concern for 16 out of 20. So for 80% of our issues, Gen Z is the most concerned, which gives them an overall concern of 79% of an average level of concern. And it literally steps down the generations till you reach boomers, who have the lowest level of overall concern for 17 out of the 20 issues. So they're literally a mirror of each other. Now, to be fair, 71% is still a reasonably high number. But you're seeing that essentially the older you are, the less concerned you are about all these things. Don't worry too much about the detail of this. I'll just get your attention to the red and the blue dots. Because if you look at, and this is obviously, there's more things you can do in this world to make an impact than what we have on this list. But these are the things that there are numbers out there that we can find about this stuff. So if you look at the sorts of things people do to try to make a personal impact on the world, you get donating, recycling, reducing disposable plastic use, completing petitions, attending rallies and events, looking for good products. Good products being we defined as ones that have a social or environmental benefit attached or give to like a social environmental cause. So they could be saying we're made with 100% renewable power or something like that, or it could be donating to a cause. So it's a fairly broad set of products. But what you start to see is that Gen Z is pretty high up on the action. The blue dots are people who act the most, the generation acts the most, and that's fairly well scattered. But then again, boomers, if you look on average, they've got 3 red dots against them. So they are, again, least likely to act, which makes sense. If you're not as concerned, you're not as likely to do something about it, right? Which brings us to the question, that's what we're passionate about, but who's got the power to change it? Where does power lie and the ability to affect these things? But for that, I'm going to give you Claire.
Power, powerful things. So let's start with perhaps the most powerful thing in the world. Let's start with money. So this slide looks at generational wealth over 4 different generations, and there's a little bit of detail to take you through here. So unsurprisingly, the older you live, the more money you accumulate. But if we look at Gen Zs, they have over just a quarter, 27% of the household net worth of a Gen Y. Then going from Gen Y, they have less than half, 43% of the household wealth of a Gen X. Gen X is actually doing pretty okay. They've got about 75% of the wealth of a boomer. And the baby boomers, well, they're sitting on the mountain of cash. They've got $1.3 million in terms of their average household wealth. But money doesn't just exist in households, it also obviously exists in businesses. Some of the largest capital that we sit on in Australia is within companies. But who controls this wealth? Well, of Australia's top 50 companies, 0, that's a big O, are from Gen Y or Gen Z. It's pretty evenly split across boomers and Gen X. And also, who are the bosses' bosses? Well, of Australia's top 200 companies, just 21% of board members are aged 55 or under. So this is a really critical moment of pause to reflect and say the people that are making decisions, both at the CEO level and also up into the board, are actually overwhelmingly represented by older Australians. My least favourite slide of all. The laughter in the room, the awkward laughter. So of the top 200 companies in Australia, 12, that's literally 12 women, are the CEOs of those top 200 companies. I believe that there's a study that was done that found out you were more likely to have a common name of John than you were to be a woman in a top company in Australia as a CEO. But what about power in politics? So there's a little bit to unpack on this slide, so I'm going to take you through it. The first differentiator is age. So we can see currently members of parliament are overwhelmingly represented at 40 plus. And there's a little bit more here to look at. Between 60 and even 65 and over, there's almost double the representation there is between 30 to 39-year-olds. Gender. Well, in government, we're doing a little bit better than in business. We've got about 40% representation of women in Australia's current government. But it's really important to note that the majority of these women are not in the executive or leadership positions within their parties. Then looking at ethnic diversity, 1 in 4 Australians have a non-European or an Indigenous background, but only 1 in 10 current candidates last election were of that same background. And then looking at another factor, disability, 18% of Australians have a disability. But in the last election, there was only 1% of a candidate recording having a disability in the election. So it really does then beg the question, who is voting all these older people into Parliament? It's kind of not super surprisingly, but the older people voting them are older people. So boomers or people aged 75 plus are 40% of our enrolled voters. But Gen Z, very tellingly, is only at 10%. Now, this is a really important point as well, because that's actually not the statistical representation of that group in our society. They're actually under-enrolled. So if, in fact, we want to start making change in different areas, that's a key place that you'd want to have a look at. And then, across our top issues, political action isn't aligned with our concerns. So quite depressingly, 2018, the federal government removed 50% of protected areas from Australian marine parks. So that's not going to do much for our ocean concerns. And then if there is a prize for coming last, please, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Australia's climate policy. We were rated 57 out of 57 in the 2020 Climate Change Performance Index. So it's actually interesting to note, like Turkey, Bulgaria, Algeria, Malta, Iran, Kazakhstan, the stands are actually rated higher and more progressively on climate policy than we are. And then on plastic waste, another round of applause. South Australia, thank you so much. They're the only state and territory across this entire country that is doing anything on single-use plastics. Well done. So it really does then beg the question, who has the power to actually make change and who is actually going to do something about this?
So at the moment, relying on government's probably not going to get us there. Who kind of thought we were going to have a big let's do something about climate change moment about 10 years ago? Did everyone kind of feel that way? Yeah. It's if you look at the history of, well, climate is just one piece, but you go all the way back to Kevin 07, basically. Came in on the platform of that. We then went through all the different things that were going to happen. Then we had the carbon tax that came and then went again. We've had coal in Parliament. We've had the whole thing. We've been through the whole thing. And where are we? Back basically where we were 10 years ago on that. And in a way, that is a tell, I think, personally, for what's going on generally with a lot of these issues. It's not to say there's not progress on some, but if you look at it, if we as a country have been waiting quite a long time, and what you're starting to see is people, I believe at least, start to go, someone's got to do something here. And like I assumed it would just happen, but it's not happening, which opens up the opportunity, of course, for brands, which is starting to see this world, of course, grow very quickly, as to companies and brands saying, well, if there's going to be a vacuum on these issues that people care about, well, we'll step into it. The day that VB became 100% renewable, you know that there's something going on here, sort of thing. So how do people feel about this? Do they want brands to act? Are they interested in this? Brands and companies? Well, yeah, they do. Almost 4 out of 5, so just under 80% of us say that brands and products should support causes or make changes to their products that address social environmental issues. That's an enormous number of people. It's essentially everyone but the laggards. is saying this has to happen. You can read what they say, it's in the report, but they say all sorts of interesting things. Whenever you do research, it's actually the verbatim, the quotable quotes are the most interesting bit because they let you a bit more depth. But and I'm always amazed by the always one, there's literally the population there, 4 out of 5. And there's always one, and look what he has to say. Why would a business do that? So there's always somebody really pulling quite hard in the opposite direction, but what do? We ignore them, we move on. Yeah. Very importantly though, people have a good detector for authenticity. They say this consistently throughout this, I want them to act, but I want them to do it authentically. I don't want them jumping on the bandwagon. I don't want to be ear bashed. I don't want to be told you should do this, you should do this. They want the brand to do a lot of the doing. Yeah, they want to do it as a partnership, but they want to make sure you're in it for the right reasons. You're in it for the long term. And you're not there sort of suddenly becoming, aren't we, the holy hero of all this when we've got like 100 years of history of not really being interested. So they want you to get involved authentically. We are ready to reward the brands that act. So this has been we've obviously been doing this for about 13 years, and this has been one of the great conversations. Yeah, I know that people want it, but they won't pay for it, and so why should we do it, sort of thing. Where's the benefit to us as the business? Well, the benefit's all over it. 3 in 5 people now say they are actively looking for products and brands that support causes or have environmentally friendly attributes. So they'll look for them sometimes, not all the time. 50% say they have purchased a product because it promises some form of social and environmental benefit within the last month. And about 20% said they did so in the last week. So they're pretty high numbers for a majority of the population to make this part of the decision set, all the way down through to 20% doing it pretty much weekly. Now, we don't obviously have the numbers of like 5 years ago, but I think you could take an assumption that's risen significantly in that time. And to answer the golden magical question, this is the fundamental one, yeah, but will they pay for it? That's always the question that comes back from a business. And the answer is yes, they will. 6 out of 10 people say they will pay more. So 6 is now a majority of people will pay more. 3 in 10 say I won't pay more, but it's what's always been called a kicker. If I've got 2 options, I'll choose the good one, kind of thing. So that's 3 out of 10. 1 in 10 actually say, no, I want it to cost less. Still, the majority is prepared to pay more. How much more? Unsurprisingly, not a lot more, but a little bit more. So 1 in 3 people, up to 5%. 14% up to 10%, 5% I'll pay up to 20%, and the other 5% up to 30% more. So it's this is what it's about for me. When you add those up though, that's roughly a quarter of the population prepared to pay 10% or higher, and a third of the population prepared to pay up to 5%. So you can't put a big premium on it necessarily, though there are brands breaking that rule, but you can certainly put a premium on it. Also, you will note that obviously brands tend to want to market themselves to higher income people, individuals, not surprisingly. There is interest at every single level, doesn't matter how much you earn, but you'll see that the propensity or the preparedness to pay more increases as your income increases. No big surprises there. It means that higher value shopper is starting to become very much a shopper with the values too. So I'll put my money where my beliefs are. And what are they buying? They're buying everything. So we asked people, so what's the last thing you bought because it had a social environmental benefit? And it was just scatter. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason, which is great because it's not like they're buying one category, they're buying all categories. Takeaway in a box that I was able to recycle. Fruit and veg that would have been gone to waste, imperfect pick stuff. Home and contents insurance that plants a tree, reusable beeswax lids, peanut butter that's made in Australia, recycled material clothing, more made in Australia, reusable coffee cup, cruelty-free skincare, household products from packaged in recycled plastic. And you're starting to see people are interested in the whole lot. If you do, we're going to hand over in a moment, but if you do want to know more about this, we've actually cut this research so many different ways. We've just given you the top line here, and obviously you can get more if you go and download the 2 reports. This is a bit of an intro. But importantly, we've actually cut it across 9 different industries so that we can tell you that's broadly what Australia wants, but what do they want particularly from a sector? And we can tell you that for this sector, these are the top 3 things that people think that sector or industry should support. So, and it does vary quite a lot across sectors, you can imagine. There's some consistencies, but it varies quite a lot. So we've got it across food and alcohol, everyday household purchases, clothing, footwear, travel and tourism, comms and entertainment, alcoholic beverages, non-alcoholic sits in food, homemaker items, utilities, banking, insurance and super. So if you are interested in your sector, we don't have it as a pretty report, but we definitely have the information. Give us a call and we can give you a specific download on what matters to you. So thank you. That is the top line of what we discovered. I would encourage you to go to powerandthepassion.com.au and download both versions and have a look, because one's more about you as a citizen and one's more about brands. Thank you.